Hey, everybody, welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Recording this here on Thursday. Dan Labbe with Mary Kay Cabot and Ashley Bastock. And earlier this morning, we heard from Browns GM Andrew Berry. He held his pre-draft press conference on Thursday. It was about as enlightening as these pre-draft press conferences usually are. These things have become a little too self-aware for me in some ways. Like these GMs and coaches now just go up and admit they're not going to tell us anything, but that's okay. Still, there was some stuff to glean from this, and I want to start here, Mary Kay, because you've won, you've done it, you've worn me down. You have had you've been a Jalen Milroe fan. I don't know what to call it. You've had an affinity for Jalen Milroe. That's how I'll put it. You've had an affinity for Jalen Milroe going back to maybe even before the Senior Bowl, and then of course at the Senior Bowl that week we talked a lot about Jalen. And he was a topic today. Andrew talked about him. And I've got to admit, and I wrote about this a little bit, it's going to go up on Friday morning. I've come around on Jalen Milroe just to the sense of if they're not taking a quarterback at 2, and like none of these other guys really get me excited. Tyler Shook, Jackson Dart, anyone else you want to throw out there. None of them really get me excited in that second tier of quarterbacks, other than just this idea of maybe what Jalen Milroe could be. I don't know if he's going to get there. I don't know if Cleveland is the right place for it to happen, but I've come around to this idea of like, if you're just not going to take a guy at 2, if you're going to roll the dice on somebody, go big, see what you can do with Jalen Milroe. And if you're right back here next year, okay, what did you really lose in the process?
Yeah, I mean, once again, the traits are definitely tantalizing. I've seen him up close and personal myself. So I've seen him throw the ball. He did not have a particularly good Senior Bowl. And yes, this does predate the Senior Bowl because that's when I talked to his quarterbacks coach, Jordan Palmer, about him. And he compared him to Lamar Jackson and said he's absolutely worth the number 1 pick in the draft. And he doesn't mess around when he's talking about these quarterbacks. So I kind of got onto the Jalen Milroe scent early on because of that. And he went out and he had an uneven Senior Bowl. He just really didn't throw the ball well, but he's been working really, really hard since then. He had a really nice pro day, ran a 4.37. He's a project. As we've said so many times before, you'd have to commit to the bit, but there's something there. There's something very intriguing about him if you are going to take a developmental quarterback. He is the quintessential developmental quarterback because he's really going to need some work and some polishing in his passing game, but he's coming up that learning curve very quickly. And a couple of other things that I like about him is that he's a very, very hard worker. He's got the work ethic. He's smart, and he's got a great personality, You guys would absolutely really, really, really like Jalen Milroe. So lots of things to like about him. I don't know if they're going to have a chance to get their hands on him by any stretch of the imagination. We don't know where any of these quarterbacks are going. We don't know if the Browns would think about trading back. We have no idea if he'll be there at 33 and if they would take him. But I think we can all agree that he is someone who is absolutely fun to watch when you see him zipping around and then firing that football.
Yeah, I mean, to me at least, there's a line that I would draw in what I would actually do to go get him if I were the Browns. But again, just going to this quote from Andrew Berry today when he was asked about some of these quarterback prospects and just the way he talked about Jalen. I think Jalen, he's got rare physical talent. When he gets in the NFL, he may be the only quarterback who's faster than Lamar. Don't tell Lamar I said that. He's got rare physical gifts. He's strong. He's fast. He's got a really strong arm. And any system you build around him, you want to take advantage of the fact that he has things that no other players at the position have. And so that's what kind of, also led me to this idea of like, again, if you're going to roll the dice on a guy, Ashley, roll the dice on the guy that you're going to say that about. And also elsewhere in the presser, he did point out multiple times, not just about Jalen, but about, I think, all the quarterbacks. It took Mahomes sat for a year. Jalen Hurts, it took some time for him to become Jalen Hurts. Josh Allen took about 2-3 years to become Josh Allen. So I thought there were other instances too where he was pretty clear that, maybe they don't see a ready-made quarterback in this draft, or if they don't see a ready-made quarterback in this draft, that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's something we've heard fairly consistently from Andrew as well. Like, I think back to the combine, and that was when he really, I think, went for it in terms of comparing like this quarterback class to 2017, right? And how things can be viewed differently by team to team and further down the line. And to Mary Kay's point, as loyal listeners of this podcast will remember, I came away from the combine also raving about Jalen Milroe and how much I liked him only just from his little 15-minute podium interview. I think I even said on the pod that day, like, he was so nice and such a warm personality. I hope he finds success in the NFL no matter where he lands, even if it's not in Cleveland. But the other interesting wrinkle in this to me today that we got has nothing to do with what Andrew Berry said, but I'm thinking about it because in some mock drafts, a lot of the latest mock drafts, the national ones, like, I keep seeing people toying with this idea of him going to the Steelers at 21. And Aaron Rodgers made an appearance on the Pat McAfee show today and seemed to still leave everything open and leave his timeline open, right? And leave the option to retire open to himself. So it does make me wonder, with the Steelers sitting there and Russell Wilson gone, Justin Fields gone, Mason Rudolph in that room, who is going to be available to them at 21 now? Will Jackson Dart be available? Will Jalen Milroe be available? And are they now going to be one of those teams that are going to bite on a quarterback in the first round in a quote unquote weaker class because of their need?
Yeah, as uninspired as maybe you might be by Kenny Pickett and Joe Flacco. Right now, the Steelers' quarterback room is Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson. So that's probably the worst quarterback room right now, definitely in the division, maybe in the entire NFL. Which, if the Steelers don't have an answer about Aaron Rodgers, they might have to act a little bit out of desperation, just because they're going to have. Maybe that's Jackson Dart, maybe that's Jalen Milroe, maybe that's Tyler Schick. I don't know, but the Steelers become very interesting in this draft because, at least as of now, we don't have an answer on Aaron Rodgers. The other part of this, Mary Kay, is obviously Tommy Rees knows Jalen Milroe about as well as anyone, probably better than anyone in the Browns organization, for sure. And he was his coordinator in 2023 in Alabama. Now, there's two sides to that coin. The first is maybe he really loved Jalen and, thinks the world of him and thinks you can bring him in and turn him into a pro. The flip side of that is he certainly knows all of Jalen's flaws and all of his limitations. And they did bench him for a game after they lost to Texas in 2023. So maybe it's not all just smiles and pats on the back and sunny outlooks for Jalen Milroe because his 2023 OC is here. But if the Browns are going to take this risk, if they decide to do it, they really don't have. I mean, there's not a better resource out there than the guy that was his coordinator for a season.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. I want to back up on something really, really quickly before I fast forward again to Jalen, and that is the Steelers and Kirk Cousins. I have been predicting that perhaps Kirk Cousins will end up with with Kirk Cousins in the event that he's willing to waive that no trade clause after the draft, and if they don't have Aaron Rodgers. So I think that's something to keep an eye on there. So let's see how that goes, but that could be very interesting. The Browns might end up having to face Kirk Cousins instead of having him as their quarterback. And so as far as Jalen is concerned, yeah, I do think that Tommy and Jalen might have had their little bumps in the road together a little bit, but I think they worked through those. I think they worked through their bumps in the road. I think there are a lot of people in this organization that like Jalen Milroe for a lot of the reasons that we've been talking about. And again, I don't know if they will be able to get their hands on him by any stretch of the imagination. We don't have any idea where any of these quarterbacks are going. But if he is around somewhere where they don't probably have to give up assets to get him, I think that they will be interested.
And I also keep coming back to this idea, and that this would be another win for you, Mary Kay, of if you draft Jalen Milroe, at the very least, you're drafting a guy that you can put on the field as a rookie, even if he's not your starter. Like he could be I kind of come back to this Taysom Hill thing, right? Like he could be sort of your Taysom Hill, where you bring him in certain situations. He can run, he can throw, he could just be a wild card. And so, Ashley, I think that's another. You're not drafting him just for that, obviously, especially if you're taking him in the second round or trading into the first to get him. But that is another benefit of bringing him in. At least you could put him on the field and find a way to use him in year one, even if Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco are starting for you.
Yeah, I mean, he is just so fast, right? I mean, I keep thinking about that Andrew quote from today that we said off the top of talking about Jalen Milroe, that Andrew made the quip that he might be faster than Lamar, right? Like, I think that kind of speed and athleticism, you can find a reason for. And I mean, this is the podcast that we gave ample time to arguing for a goal line package for Joshua Dobbs a couple of years ago. I stand by that. Mary Kay, you were on this very podcast all the time. I agreed with it. I think if you got him in here, and that would kind of be the way to integrate him in different ways. And if you want Joe Flacco to start, if you want Kenny Pickett to start at the beginning of the year, that's great. Give him some time to acclimate, because I do think at the end of the day, Jalen Milroe is going to be a project for wherever he ends up, right? He's not a surefire first rounder. I think he may go in the first round just given needs and the quarterback class this year, but it's certainly not a guarantee. It is still a possibility he could be available for them at 33. And I think if it was last year, obviously, he definitely wouldn't be a first rounder. He's a project, but I think in those ways you can kind of get his feet wet a little bit in terms of the NFL game, the speed of it all, and see how he fares.
And I don't think it would preclude you from doing anything in the future either. If you're in the same spot next year, drafting top 10 or whatever, and there's another quarterback you like, unless Jalen Milroe just sets the world on fire in like December or something, if you give him an opportunity, I don't think he precludes you from taking another guy and having an open competition next year. I just think there is a lot of appeal to Jalen Milroe. I'm not 100% again, this is more of a, for me at least, this is an endorsement of, if you're going to roll the dice, go big. So I'm all for it. It's more exciting to me than some of their other options. Now let's talk about the guy that it seems like they are likely to draft. And of course, there were a lot of questions about him today during Andrew's availability, and that is Travis Hunter. So Mary Kay, Andrew has kind of, I don't want to say backed off, but he's gone out of his way to make it clear that he does believe Travis Hunter is an elite cornerback as well as an elite wide receiver. But he did reiterate today that they do view him as a receiver because of his ball skills and because of that ability to go get the football, which is something this team sorely lacks. We know this offense was so bad last year, in part because they just didn't have a quarterback, but there were other reasons, and not having enough guys that could go get the football was a big part of it. So what did you come away with today feeling about Travis Hunter? Are you still sort of in the mode of it's going to be Travis at number 2? Did anything change for you today hearing Andrew talk?
Well, I think he is probably the number one option now in my mind for that pick, if they stay there and that's the route that they go. And it seems like if you have some transformational players available to you at number 2, that you would be inclined to actually make a pick there than do anything else. I did ask Andrew if he would be open to doing anything else with that pick in terms of trading it or moving out of it, or would he stay there because he has these 2 guys that are considered generational or transformational in Travis and Abdul. And he didn't say, yes, we're inclined to stay there. He said, we are open to anything trading up, which was a little bit different than what he said at the NFL annual meeting when he said that was really unlikely. So that's on the table. Staying put is on the table. Trading down and trading for a veteran. So whatever they can do to maximize that pick for the organization is what they're going to do. So that was a big takeaway for me. But I still do think that right now, if they're staying at number 2, I think that would be the pick. Travis.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot that made me think like, oh, it could, oh, wait a second, maybe it is going to be Shador after all, or maybe it will be Abdul Carter. But also, I did think it was interesting, and maybe it was just Andrew being Andrew. I don't know, Ashley. He did leave everything on the table with that number 2 pick. So I guess he said they're going to use the shot clock. So I think he means that they're going to use the shot clock on this pick, and we really aren't going to know until after the Titans make their pick at 1, if it is the Titans that make that pick at 1, what the Browns are going to do until they're on the clock Thursday night.
We really aren't. And I did think the one quote that stuck out to me in terms of, like, is it going to be a quarterback or is it going to be Travis? I'm with Mary Kay. Like, I left there today thinking Travis to me still feels like the front runner. But that quote from Andrew about we're not going to make a panic pick at quarterback, like that to me just it says something, right? Because he could have answered it in a more, I think, obtuse way with this idea of would you trade up from 33 to chase a quarterback you like, or would you take a quarterback at 2 just because you feel like you need to fill out that room? And this idea of them not panicking and taking a quarterback, like the fact that he introduced it and said it in that way just makes me think like, oh, maybe they really are not gonna chase somebody here just because they feel like they need to fill out the room. And again, it kind of like what I wrote today is it kind of goes in line with this 5 years of Andrew Berry draft strategy that we've seen. Now, granted, we've only seen them have a first round pick 2 times out of those 5 years, but they've constantly talked about building rosters like expansion teams and taking the best player available and taking players where you can get really good value for them and trading down because they had a bunch of players valued really similarly and they thought they could get somebody later and add assets. Like, this is what we do know about how they handle drafts. And I just keep coming back to if you have who everyone says, and who, if the Browns think this, if the Browns have graded Travis Hunter as the best prospect and he falls to them at number 2, that to me says value. And from what we know about them, I feel like they would jump on that.
Yeah, and I think to kind of build off of that, Mary Kay, I think the idea of and this doesn't mean that they can't like one of these other quarterbacks, but I think if you're sitting there after 3-14 season, when you are in the process of remaking your quarterback room and you have the number 2 pick, and you don't take a quarterback there, for as good as Travis Hunter might be, for as good as Abdul Carter might be, if you are looking at this group, I think there is. I think we can look at that and say they probably aren't 100% sure that any of these guys are franchise-changing quarterbacks. I think that's fair to say if they're not taking one at number 2 overall. Because if you did believe that, you would just take one. Because as we've talked about, you start to play this game of, well, maybe they'll trade back into the first round. Maybe they'll do. Now you're really competing with other people. And you're sort of acknowledging that if we miss out on that guy, we miss out on him. So I think if they do, and if we get to Thursday night and they do end up passing on Shador at number 2, they're telling us that maybe they don't believe there's that sure thing franchise quarterback in this draft. And that doesn't mean that they don't like some of these guys and they won't take some of these guys with the idea of maybe unearthing that gem. But they obviously aren't 100% sold that their quarterback for the next 10 years is sitting right there for them at number 2.
Yeah, that could be the case. And when we look back at this draft, I think there are going to be 1 or 2 quarterbacks that surprise everyone. And it's going to be a matter of who can identify those 1 or 2 guys that are the sleeper picks in this draft that are going to go out there and have a nice career. And Andrew said something else today that I thought was very interesting. And it was something to the effect of if you like a guy's traits well enough, you can do enough to support him and surround him with talent and coaching and scheme and make him be successful if he has enough stuff. And I think we've seen that lately with a lot of the quarterbacks last season and then some of the retreads that are out there now being successful with their new teams. So I think there are ways in today's game, and the game has changed, right? the game has changed for defenders in how receivers get covered and how quarterbacks can be dealt with. So the game has changed to the point where I think that you can take more quarterbacks today and have them be successful in the NFL. It's just a matter of which ones and can you get it right in a class like this where it's not certain. I don't even think that anybody after Cam Ward, I don't think you can look at any of them and predict with any certainty what might happen to them in the NFL. But somebody is going to hit the jackpot on a quarterback or two in this draft. And who is going to be worth their salt? I remember in 2017, it was Kansas City and Brett Veach identifying Patrick Mahomes as that guy. Is that going to be what happens this year with Jalen Milroe? Is somebody missing somebody that we're not even talking about? So I do think that there are going to be a couple of guys that come into this league and nail it. And are the Browns going to end up with one of those guys, or will it be back to the drawing board next year?
Yeah, and it's so hard too because like even the college game is harder to translate college success to like what does that look like? Or was a guy held back in college? Or was he helped in college? You know, like it's the discussion with Jackson Dart. Was that the Lane Kiffin offense? Is Jackson Dart that good? You know, it's so hard to figure out. And just when you look through, there's never been more like diversity in the style of quarterback in the NFL than we have right now. I mean, it used to be if you need a quarterback, you got to take a guy who's 6'6", 240 pounds, and he's got to have a rocket arm, and he's got to be all of these things. But then you go through, you know, there are certainly quarterbacks who fit that mold that are successful right now in the NFL, but now you've got guys like Lamar Jackson and, you know, even Josh Allen, even though he's that big strong arm guy, he's got that mobility and he's just a different looking quarterback. Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Jared Goff, you know, was the quarterback of the top seed in the NFC last year. There's just so many different like shapes and sizes to all of this, Ashley. And I think that's again why even no matter what you thought of what you saw of Jalen Milroe at Alabama, at the right price, he comes to the NFL. You almost just have to go like clean slate. Now let's see what happens when he gets here, because there's just so many different ways to do this at this level.
There are, and like Jalen Milroe is so different from Shedeur Sanders, right? Who is also so different from Cam Ward. I think for a lot of people, maybe not people listening to this podcast, I imagine you're more familiar with these prospects, but I think people who are not as familiar look at Shedeur Sanders and think, oh, he's Deion Sanders' son. He must be this big dual threat athlete, right? And that's not the game that Shedeur plays. He's more of that traditional drop back sort of guy that we've actually ironically seen Kevin Stefanski do a lot of good things with. So that to me is also the interesting piece in all of this is if they do end up with Jalen Milroe, we haven't seen them develop a guy like Jalen Milroe. Now, truthfully, we haven't really seen them develop anybody, right? They haven't had to draft a quarterback. But I'm fascinated by that because it does go against their type. And fit does not have to be everything. We've talked about talent versus fit. You got to go with talent. If you think Jalen Milroe has the ability, the capability to ultimately be one of the more talented prospects in this year's class, then yeah, you gotta take him. But it's just hard to guess at that, like you said, Dan, because like these guys are so different from one another, even right now. Like, and that's not even adding in the where they end up and how that is going to impact them, because it's not comparing apples to apples between, you know, the top 3 or 4 guys right now, throwing Jackson Dart in there as well.
Yeah, that's the type, right? Like what type of quarterback best fits what the Browns want to do. I think what the types of quarterbacks we've seen Andrew Berry acquire, right? Deshaun Watson, dual threat quarterback. He drafted Dorian Thompson Robinson, you know, a dual threat quarterback. You know, Kevin Stefanski, meanwhile, has had more success with Baker Mayfield and Joe Flacco and guys, Jameis Winston. Although Kevin wasn't the play caller for Jameis, but it looked better when Jameis was running it. He seemed to fit what they were trying to do. So that's the interesting dynamic here too, Mary Kay, is Andrew seems to have a preference to really love the dual threat quarterback. And it's not fair to just call Deshaun Watson a runner. He was when he was in Houston, he was a very good pocket passer too, but he was like the whole package. But he's had more of a penchant for that type of quarterback, and we've seen Kevin has had a little bit more of a penchant for the Kirk Cousins or that sort of more traditional pocket passer. And maybe it would have worked with Deshaun if everything else wouldn't have been going on. Maybe Kevin and Deshaun would have been just perfect together, and we just never got to see it. So it's a little unfair to put Kevin in that box, but those are the types of quarterbacks he's had the most success with.
Well, that's all true, but I think that we have to look at this globally too. And Tommy Rees, we know that he has already worked with Jalen Milroe and developed Jalen Milroe, and maybe he can pick up where he left off. And even Andrew mentioned how much that helps to have someone that really knows the ins and outs of Jalen Milroe and how he ticks and all those kinds of things. So there's that. And then Billy Musgrave, who has vast amounts of experience as an offensive coordinator, as a quarterback's coach, and is a former quarterback himself in the NFL and has worked with so many different kinds of quarterbacks. He coached Michael Vick. So you have to look at what they have on their staff, not just what we've seen Kevin Stefanski do with these quarterbacks and what his quote unquote type is. Because I think that they could commit to the bit if they choose to do something like that. I have no idea if they will. I really don't. I think it would be cool. I think it would be different. I think it would be kind of fun. And if they do choose to do that, they do have guys on the staff, their offensive coordinator and their quarterbacks coach, who do have experience with quarterbacks like that.
Yeah, and also, if you're talking about Tommy Rees as this brilliant offensive mind, you would hope he could be that sort of adaptable coordinator too, and that maybe, it's easy to look at it and feel like, well, Kevin is kind of bringing Tommy along and developing him, and certainly that's sort of what's happening. But Tommy's bringing his own stuff too, right? He's bringing his own ideas and his own methods, and so, yeah, I really want to see what this offense is ultimately going to look like, and I don't know if we're going to see. I mean, it's probably looking a lot like Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco early on, so it probably is going to look a lot like the old Kevin offense. But Ashley, maybe there's going to be something just bubbling under the surface there of like, just when that right guy is ready to come in and take over, we're going to see something we haven't seen.
Yeah, and I think ultimately that's the key, right? They haven't had the quarterback that has changed the fortunes of the franchise. I mean, obviously things didn't work out with Baker. The Deshaun experiment was essentially a non-starter due to the suspension and injuries. Like, he never got a full season here with Kevin and this staff and this regime. So they haven't had that guy. We've seen Kevin at his best, I think, piecing it together with a bunch of guys as they were filling in for Deshaun after the shoulder injury in 2023. And then obviously Joe Flacco brought some magic, but we haven't seen them with quote unquote the guy. They are still in the hunt for that guy. So I definitely think things could potentially look a lot different if they find that guy and he happens to be different from everything they've had before.
Okay, we are going to wrap up our podcast there, our Andrew Berry recap of his pre-draft availability here on Thursday. We've got a draft pod coming your way over the weekend. Tim and Lance are going to join me, and they are going to talk all about defensive guys. Yeah, I should know this because I'm recording with them in about half an hour here. Defensive guys, edge rushers, defensive tackles. I'm going to make them pound the table for some guys that they want the Browns to take just generally, and we'll do our mock draft as well. So you can check that out. That'll probably go up on Saturday morning. It'll also be up on YouTube, just like this pod will. Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com for that. Orange and Brown Talk is our Instagram. Orange Brown Talk is the Twitter. And if you're not a Football Insider subscriber, cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page. For Mary Kay and Ashley, I'm Dan. Thanks for listening, everybody.